Do you own property with someone? Do you know what type of ownership you have? Are you a sole owner, tenant by entirety, or is your property owned by a trust? Stay tuned to learn the difference. Hi, I'm Kimberly Ivory Graves, your help, Holistic Elite Legacy Planner, aka Help Me Kimberly. I'm also the author of Leaving Peace in Order, which is a step-by-step guide to getting your affairs in order. If you're interested in getting a copy of my book, go to my website, helpmekimberly.com, and there you'll find that I have accompanying workbooks. I have the mini-size workbook, and I also have the full-size workbook, or you can get the worksheets on a flash drive. So when placing your order, make sure that you select accordingly. This is the Living Peace and Order Show, where we share tips to a life of love and peace through Jesus Christ and steps to getting your affairs in order. Do me a favor, why don't you hit that like button or the share button, tag someone, let them know that you're viewing the Living Peace and Order Show. And if you're on my YouTube channel and you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so that you will not miss any of the episodes. Also add a comment, or if you have questions, put your questions below. Thank you in advance for completing your assignment. Our scripture for the week is found in Psalms 29:11, and it reads, "The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace." And each week we share the scripture of the week because the Living Peace and Order Show is divided into two segments. The first segment is our peace segment, and that's where we share 52 weeks of peace. And during that time, we share a different scripture each week on peace. And this is aired on Clubhouse every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Make sure you join us. And then the second aspect of the Living Peace and Order Show is the order aspect. And this is aired every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and on YouTube. So make sure that you join us on these platforms. We've had some exciting times and you don't want to miss an episode. Thank you. Well, tonight we're going to discuss the difference between sole ownership, tenant by entirety, and trust ownership. But before we get started, just a recap of what we covered on last time. The last show we talked about joint tenancy and tenancy in common. And we talked about the difference between them, and a joint tenant is basically the difference is when someone passes away, the person who passes away, if it's a joint tenant, the property or their interest in the property will go automatically to the other owners or the other co-owners. However, in tenants in common, their property will go, if they pass away, their interest in the property will go to their heirs. So that's kind of like the main difference. You can go back and listen to the previous show to kind of hear the breakdown, and also my personal testimony as it relates to my uncle and my mom being tenants in common. Well, tonight, let's see, we're going to talk about sole ownership. And sole ownership is just basically that, where it's one individual, single individual owns their property. And the sole owner owns, of course, 100% of the property. However, if the owner passes away, if that person passes away, his or her interest in the property is included in their estate. So automatically, when you pass away and you're the sole owner and of the property, that property is passed on to your estate. And it also will go into probate, and the state will determine who will get the property if you have not put any legal documentation together like a will or a trust. And so it is really important that you make sure that you understand, as an owner, and wanting to pass your property on, that you seek the proper legal entities to make sure that something is in place. Because if you leave your property and you haven't stated that, and you haven't completed a will, and you haven't stated who will get it, actually your state will make that determination, because your property will go into probate. And while in probate, if it's found that you have debt, the property can be sold and the debts will be paid off. And that can even happen even if you say that you want your property to go to, say, your son or your daughter. If you have debt, because once your property goes into probate, if you have debt, the collectors can actually, and the law can enforce that property be sold to pay off your debt. So it is important, number one, to make sure you pay off your debt, but also that you really kind of look into maybe putting your property into a trust, and that will protect it from going into probate. But again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a tax preparer. I just share this information based on what I have experienced. So if there is no will or trust, as I stated, the property will go through probate, and the state will determine who will get your property. The second type of ownership that I wanted to talk about is tenancy by entirety. And tenancy by entirety is when property is owned by a married couple. Now, you must be married in order for tenancy by entirety goes into effect. And this is actually where both spouses own the property equally, so 100%. It's not 50-50, it's 100%. Now, of course, joint tenancy is 50-50, but tenancy by entirety is 100%. The couples are seen as one entity, and so thus this protects the couple. Say if one of the spouses passed away, and say that particular spouse had some debt. It's not the other spouse, but the spouse that passed away had debt. By having the property in tenancy by entity, that living spouse is protected, and the creditors cannot come after the home to pay off the debt. So that's very key, and make sure that you find out whether this is an option in the state that you live in. Because of course the information that I'm sharing is based on the state of Illinois and what I've learned and gleaned from the state that I live in. So I'm going to pause here and say, make sure that when you go back and review this information or search this information out for the area that you live in, make sure that you understand the laws that are in your state. So I said if one spouse passes away, automatically the surviving spouse remains in control of the property. They still own the property, and the property does not go into probate. So that's another good thing of having tenancy by entirety for couples. However, if the remaining spouse passes away and he or she has not written a will or a trust, or put the property in a trust, I should say, that property will then go into probate. And so if they were hoping that their child or children would inherit the property, it is really important that they put this property into a trust so that it, number one, would not have to go through probate, and number two, it can be divided and distributed according to their wishes. The final topic that I wanted to talk about was trust ownership. And trust ownership is exactly what it says. It's where individuals who own the property decide to move that property into a trust. So that means that they work with a estate planning attorney and they create a revocable living trust and move that or transfer that property into the trust fund. Now this keeps the property from going through probate, and then you can be very, very specific of how you want, not only the property but other assets that you put in the trust, how you want it distributed, to whom you want it distributed, and when you want it distributed. So it is important to even look into, creating a trust, because it protects your property. And it also protects your family from having your property go through probate, which can, kind of drain the resources that, maybe what the property is worth, the value of it would go down because of all the probate fees and, and properties held up and just, all of that. So I do encourage you to look into trust ownership, because that is, like I said, because of all the offerings that it offers. And creditors cannot come after your property when it's in a trust. So that's another plus, is that it's protected from creditors. So when you pass away, you have already set in place who inherits your property when you're gone. That's another benefit of having a trust, is that you can be very, very specific of who gets what. Now, after Douglas and I paid off our home and we met with our attorney, we decided to put our home in a trust. And so therefore we can determine, who gets what and when, if something happened to the two of us. So definitely I encourage you to look into trust ownership. Now, here are a few tips that I want to share with you, just some recommendations, and I shared it on the previous show, but I'm going to reiterate it. Is number one, get a copy of your current deed to identify the type of ownership that you have. Make sure you know and understand. Talk to a real estate attorney to understand the best type of ownership for you. If you're a married couple, if you're single, you want to put it in a trust, make sure you talk to a real estate attorney and an estate planning attorney. Take the time to talk to an estate planning attorney if you plan to leave your property to a loved one. And finally, make sure that you talk to a tax preparer to understand what, tax ramifications are, and make sure that they understand the laws, the property and estate laws in your area. Well, these are tips that I want to share with you as it relates to property ownership. And I encourage you to watch both shows, the previous show and this show, and do your homework. Go ahead and kind of identify where your property is, what you want to do with it, and maybe even look into a trust ownership. And most importantly, make sure that you have that will set up and trust and those legal documents to state, who will get your property once you pass on. I'm going to stop there. And thank you so very much for joining the Living Peace and Order show. I pray that something was said that, would help you going forward, even if you haven't bought property yet, but you're thinking about buying property, if you're thinking about co-ownership, or you and your spouse are going to buy your first home, whatever the dynamics are in your particular situation, make sure that you go back and research and find out the best type of ownership for you. I'm Kimberly Ivory Graves, your help. Thank you for listening to the Living Peace and Order Show. God bless you, and I love you with the love of Jesus. Good night.